Good morning, everybody. I'm Joe Baber. I'm the village manager, and I chair the Behavioral Health and Addiction Recovery Committee. I'd like to thank you all for taking time out this morning for this panel discussion. Lovely Saturday morning here, so I appreciate your time. And with that being said, I'll hand it off to Alexandria, and she can moderate our discussion here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Just as a FYI, in case anyone has not used the microphones before, pressing the green button will get it to work, and then once you're done, you can let go of the button. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us. And we have the Homer Glen Behavioral Health and Addiction Recovery Committee putting on this roundtable discussion. My name is Alexandra. I am a therapy practice founder, a committee member, and a PhD candidate. I'm very excited to introduce to you some of these professionals in the field that can bring a lot of light to an often very underreported and overlooked mental health concern, which is loneliness. Loneliness is more than just a feeling. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness and social isolation as a significant public health issue, often linked to adverse outcomes such as chronic disease and even mortality. Approximately 37% of the U.S. adult population experiences moderate to severe loneliness, and this can be broken down to 23% moderate and 14% severe loneliness. Loneliness has received an epidemic designation due to being linked to mortality risks comparable to smoking and obesity, along with increased risks of cardiovascular disease, mental health disorders, chronic disease, and an overall higher healthcare utilization rate. What this means is if you are lonely, you tend to go through the healthcare system more often because of the symptoms as well as the other things associated with loneliness. One of the key reasons we're here today is to explore how loneliness is not just a one-size-fits-all experience. It shows up differently depending on age, life stage, identity, and environment. A child experiencing social isolation is different than a teenager navigating belonging, which is also different than a working adult under stress, or an older adult facing loss and disconnection. Each experience is very unique, and each requires a different lens of understanding and support, which hopefully our panel speakers will be able to provide for us. Our goal for today is to bring all these perspectives together, and you'll hear from speakers who work with each different population. All of these speakers will be offering insight into the specific drivers of loneliness, as well as practical strategies to foster connection and resilience. We'll begin by moving through the lifespan, meaning that Dr. Tony will cover childhood, Melissa will cover adolescence, Emily will cover adulthood, Dr. Raquel Novak will cover older adults and the aging population. We'll then take a very brief pause, and Erin will refocus on the LGBTQ+ and the neurodivergent communities, and Delia and Leah will then follow by covering addiction and recovery. We will then close with a moderated Q&A led by me, and we'll bring together all of these speakers to answer any questions and highlight any shared insights across the populations. I do also have a subset of questions that I'll be pulling from our anonymous submission portal, and then we'll get our lovely audience here to join us in the Q&A as well. So thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging in this very important conversation. And let's get started. Dr. Tony, take it away.
Okay. Hello? Yep. Hi, my name is Tony Delich. I'm a retired pediatrician, and I also practice behavioral mental health care, treating ADHD and coexisting problems. I also saw a large group of children with autism. So what I did in my practice, at the age of 10, I would separate the child from the parent. This allowed confidentiality with me and my patient. I also had what's called the black box. It's a index card that had like 20 different topics in, from divorce to feeding problems to depression, anxiety, and so forth. So what I want to do today is talk about 4 of these cards. I think in children and adolescents, what I saw that it starts with frustration. Frustration then builds to withdrawal or sometimes a defiance. And this leads to anxiety, and there's all kinds of forms of anxiety, right? There's general anxiety, there's phobias, there's obsessions. It's kind of like a teapot on a stove, and if you don't get the teapot off, then you go to the next step, and that's depression. Unfortunately, this leads to self-medication and then possible suicide. The second leading cause now of death in teenagers is suicide. The first is trauma, and third is cancer. So we have a crisis, and the quicker you identify the problem these kids are having, the quicker you could get therapy and hopefully avert disaster. So the first one I want to talk about is divorce. That was probably 1 in 3 marriages end in divorce. What I saw in my practice was that children were used as pawns. They would tell me, Dr. Tony, it feels like when I go to my dad's place or my mom's place, somebody asks me a million questions about, you know, what did you eat? Where did you sleep? Who was in the house? And this snowballs to the child's feelings. Says, you know, I feel like I'm on trial, and brings up a lot of emotions, especially then around holidays. I had one parent, I told you I treat ADHD, tell their son that Mom and Dr. Tony is poisoning you. He's giving you medications. He didn't want to give him medications on the weekend, but these small things build up. You could see it crescendos, and it changes. So I believe that any parent that's going through a divorce should have a mandatory counseling with it, because, you know, things change. The second one is, and you wouldn't think that this would cause stress, but it's children, families that have children with chronic illnesses. This is like cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, cancer, autism. Now, these are angels to me walking on earth. They were given these cards and they had nothing to do with anything. But it puts the stress on the family structure. I mean, just like going to church, going to a restaurant, going to a movie, going on vacation. So the kids that didn't want to complain, but they says, you know, I would like some of my own time, you know, something that I could do with my parent. And I often suggested, you know, well, maybe your mom could take you for a manicure, or your dad could take you fishing or golfing, you know. It's important to try to diffuse things and show that the other kids in the family are special. And, you know, it's a monetary thing too. It depends on what the child who's disabled has. The third thing is gay and lesbian. Now, I know there's going to be more discussion about this, but being in practice for 40 years, the biggest thing that I found was, you know, obviously tolerance. And the child or adolescent feels as though they don't belong. And coming out was huge. So with boys, the suicide rate was a lot higher when I started, just because of the cascading of the emotions that these kids have. But now, girls who come out have an equal rate of suicide as the boys did. So I think we've become more tolerant. I think things are more accepted, but I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. And lastly is about sports. Now, who would think that this would be a bad thing in a way, is having kids, instead of watching TV and being on the internet and so forth. About 30 years ago, I exposed parents giving Lasix to their sons to make weight on the Pee Wee football team. So Lasix, as you know, is a very strong diuretic. So a 10-year-old came in for his physical, and he pulled out the weight loss card, and he said, I lost 10 pounds in 3 days. So I asked him, how did you do that? He says, well, my mom gave me a pill that was given from the coach and the team doctor. So this became, we legislated this, it became a felony to give weight loss drugs to kids. Now, 30 years in the future, you hear the Ozempics and so forth, and you know, I fear that this will resurface again, and not because the kid is fat, but you know, just because they want a bigger kid on the field so they can, you know, I guess win and go to Notre Dame or go to Michigan. So I have 12 grandkids, and what I can't believe, I don't know how many of you have to make a invitation to see your grandchildren. They're involved in sports, and you know, sports are great, but it's different from when, unfortunately, I grew up where there was no organized sports. You went down to the baseball field, you played baseball. Fall, you had a football. You go down and play football. So with my kids, there was no sports on Sundays. So one weekend we go to one grandma's house, the next weekend we go to the other grandma's house. Of course, have family dinner, but the other 2 weekends, let the kids choose what they want to do. But now you have these sports where they have to pay so much, and it's really I don't know, it's a business, really. So what I see, and I had a conversation with some of my grandchildren. My one grandchild plays soccer. She's 10 years old, and she goes all over to play soccer. I mean, we're not just talking about Joliet or Aurora. We're talking about Florida. We're talking about California. We're talking about Arizona. They spend I asked her, how much did you spend last year on her sport alone? It was $12,000. So you can imagine this puts a big pressure on the family. So I asked my granddaughters, I says, what do you think about Ellie and her soccer? She says, Grandpa, she's the chosen. You know, she's good. I says, what about you guys? You know, I mean, you guys have your own niche. You are great too. And this is where, you know, parents are the experts on their kids. They really are. But they have to also be reasonable. 0.9 or 1% make it in the college D1 sports. And the odds are huge, right? So parents have to be the cheerleader, and they got to be the coach. By that I mean these kids that say we're not the chosen, go ahead and say, you know, the effort that you've done is important. And this goes a long way. You know, maybe try another skill. I tried out for every sport at St. Lawrence, didn't make one. So I played the clarinet and was on student council. My brother was all-state, all-American football and played college football. But this is an issue that I don't see resolving. I mean, today I got one granddaughter playing 3 baseball games. Not 1, not 2, but 3 baseball games. Really? What are we doing? You know, it's amazing that the buy-in that these parents and the kids too have a buy-in that they want to go ahead and be in these traveling teams and so forth. But it's a huge burden, and there's a lot more to life than sports. But I never thought that I'd see today again that I worry about giving drugs for weight loss and this involvement that they have with the kids and the sport programs that we have. And, you know, there's so many good things. Obviously, being team play and it gives self-discipline and so forth. There's a lot of good things about these sport teams. But being at my age, I just can't believe that I would ever say that sports just be with caution with that. So if any of you guys see a scenario that I talked about, try to participate in alleviating some of these things. I think the family and the grandparents and so forth are very important for this. And seek counseling if you need to. So I'm done.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much, and thank you for bringing in some commentary from your very own grandchildren, which I'm sure are the experts as well. If I can have Melissa cover adolescence next and kind of pick up where Dr. Tony left off. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Howard. I'm a licensed professional music therapist. I have my own business, Nurturing Melodies, that I've had for about 13 years now. I'm also a licensed professional counselor, and I work at Beyond Healing, Counseling and Wellness with Dr. Snow, providing counseling services as well. So I'm covering, well, I work across the lifespan with infant to end-of-life care. I do, today I'm going to talk about working with adolescents and considerations about this stage of development with loneliness. We talked a little bit about what loneliness is. While it can be social isolation, it's not just that. When we think of loneliness, we might think of that's a later in life problem, when adolescence is actually a very vulnerable population for loneliness. Someone can be surrounded by their peers and experience heightened feelings of loneliness. So it doesn't mean that you're not with people necessarily, but it's more of a lack of meaningful, close relationships or connectedness with other people. So and it is an issue for adolescents. So it's not really about the quantity of friends, it's about the quality of friendships and feeling connected and a sense of belonging. So looking at adolescence, it can be ages 10 to 18, some people start at 12 to 18, but those teen years, this is where identity forms. This is where we start to explore, who am I? What are my beliefs, my values, my interests? And there's two major things that happen in this stage of life. One is exploration. We're trying to figure out who we are and where we belong. The second thing is commitment. We start to commit to an identity, image of ourselves. And so in this time of life, we can create this healthy identity, or we may experience some turbulence in this formation of who we are and identifying ourselves. Three significant developmental changes happen here. We have significant changes in our social lives, our cognitive and emotional lives. So socially, this is a time in our life where we might start to dissolve friendships that we've had as children and start finding new social circles that with people who have similar beliefs and interests. So there's significant changes there. And then emotionally and cognitively, so if you've ever seen Inside Out, the first movie versus the second movie. The first movie, we have these core emotions, happiness, sadness, boredom, or trying to think, fear, anger. So we have these core emotions. But in adolescence, we start to form more complex, deeper dimensions of feelings at this time. So if you've seen Inside Out, the second one, anxiety arrives, embarrassment arrives. So we start to have these more complex dimensions of emotions in adolescence. And cognitively, if we do not form healthy social connections or things happen in our life, we may start to distrust friends. A friend or a peer says, I like your outfit, and you might not trust that. Self-blame, there can be rumination on self, issues with social isolation, which leads to loneliness. All these things lead to increased loneliness, withdraw, negative self-talk or image, and not knowing where they fit in. So it's a really important time in life that we are figuring this out. And if there are issues in those areas, then it can really lead to increased experience of loneliness. For our teens, prolonged loneliness can lead to depressive symptoms, It can kind of go both ways. Depressive symptoms can lead to loneliness. Loneliness can lead to depressive symptoms. And suicidal ideation, anxiety are often are reported with loneliness, with experienced loneliness. Lack of interest in social interaction, if there is different from social anxiety, but just kind of a lack of interest. If there are is a result of poor, I guess, coping mechanisms. If there are issues with developing identity, heightened level of hypervigilance around social threats. So very aware of, are my peers rejecting me? Is there disapproval and conflict within relationships? So those are all mental health considerations around identity and loneliness, feelings of loneliness. So school, we're surrounded by our peers, and we might think, how can we be lonely when we're having all these social interactions all day? But loneliness can be experienced by students. Bullying is one factor. Bullying not only significantly increases the experience of loneliness with a victim of bullying, but all students in the school. If the environment feels unsafe to be authentic and have that safety to explore our identity and form that identity and interests and beliefs and values, it makes it harder to do if the environment does not feel safe. So what schools can do and put in place, and a lot of schools do, social emotional learning. We teach children how to regulate emotions, how to communicate effectively, how to communicate effectively. And I said emotional regulation, empathy, and it teaches empathy. How do we communicate with one another and try to understand one another? How do we get what we want and communicate that effectively? So a lot of schools do have those programs in place, and it's really important that they do, as well as anti-bullying. That policies of the school include inclusion, diversity, and anti-bullying policies in place. So it is nipped before it is a problem, and the environment feels safe for all of our adolescents to work through this developmental, emotional, social, and cognitive changes in their life at that time. Dr. Delich, did I say her name right? We talked about family, the importance of that family support. Increased loneliness is experienced among teens with family who feel less supportive and are emotionally unavailable. So I mean, creating a family who creates an environment that, although in the teen years we start to move away from mom and dad, we get more independent, we may get a driver's license, we're doing our own things, building autonomy, that family structure at this age is so important that when things happen in these major changes, that they have this base of support that they can go to help through all these changes. So having a supportive, emotionally available family is really important. Social media, and romantic relationships. Of course, that is starting to form, dating. This also, while romantic relationships can decrease feelings of loneliness, at this age, there's a lot of breakups. There's a lot of instability in romantic relationships at this age. And it can experience feelings of maybe being unwanted or unloved. There might be unrealistic comparisons between relationships. And the reality is maybe a lot of teens aren't experiencing romantic relations at that time, but it can be perceived that they're experiencing it less than maybe their peers. So that perceived social media can feed into that. So the next point, social media gets kind of a bad name, but it is part of our world today. It is something that we are living with, and it can have some good and bad Some of the bad is those unrealistic comparisons. We're constantly comparing ourselves to what we're seeing on social medias, unrealistic expectations in relationships, and cyberbullying. Bullying's not just happening at school, now it's in our pockets, it's with us constantly. And so those are some things to consider. But it's also, like I said, part of our world today, and some researchers talk about the benefits of having these connections online. While the media or the internet connections, we have more communication now than ever, but less connection, like those deeper connections, relationships. So while there's mixed reviews, some of the benefits can be allowing children autonomy, or our teens autonomy, to work through social and emotional things that happen online without their parents. So the opportunity to be more independent, where in the world today we don't have those opportunities as much. So those are some researchers talking about some of those benefits, that it allows our children and teens to work things out and to kind of self-regulate and figure things out without a parent. So there's some ups and downs, but things to consider. Some ways to help with social media is just making sure there's a safe platforms, that healthy, that there are I lost it, but social interactions online, just making sure that the content of what is being viewed and having that online-offline balance, that it shouldn't all be online or all offline, that maybe having this balance is the key. So other ways that can help. So we talked about schools, SEL programs, anti-bullying campaigns, family, providing emotional availability and continuing to support their team through all of these changes, making sure that social interactions are quality, not just the quantity. We might want to push our teen to do something social, but recognizing that it is quality that is important to decrease loneliness. With counseling and music therapy, we can use, as a counselor, we could use CBT, cognitive behavioral therapies, that are adaptable to adolescents, to this stage of development, when maybe those cognitive, maladaptive thoughts occur in that formation of identity. We can work with them to have more helpful, healthier relationship with thought, behavior, and feelings. Dialectical behavioral therapy has a component in itself that is interpersonal connectedness. We learn how to let people know what we need effectively and respectfully. So those are skills that can be taught in one-on-one counseling. I truly believe that the most significant vehicle of change in counseling is providing an environment that says, I hear you, I see you, and I understand you. That is key. And I truly believe that is so significant, and that when we experience heightened loneliness is we're not being heard, seen, or understood. So having that opportunity to be in a space where you're truly feeling that, someone is truly connecting with you, can be so valuable. So that space is really important. Music therapy, we can look at musical identity. Music can heighten our emotional experience, our connectedness with one another. We can create groups where improvisation, you don't have to have any kind of musical background or skill to participate in improvisation in a music therapy setting. It could be song sharing. This is huge for our teens. What speaks to you and why? Let's hear about it. And doing this in a group with teens really can promote that connectedness between peers. Lyric analysis. What lyrics speak to you and why? And songwriting, what lyrics would you change? What would you write? And So all of those things kind of working to help be heard, seen, and understood, and all of that to decrease loneliness. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciate all of the suggestions that you have for our teens, and I'm sure we'll have some more questions about some music therapy related things, especially lyric analysis, which sounds very interesting. Can I have Emily take it away when it comes to the adult population?
Hello, good morning, everybody. First of all, I just want to say it's a privilege to be in a space with all of you. I personally know most of the women here, so I just want to say that it's feels really good to all connect for mental health. So again, just acknowledgement of thank you for allowing me to participate, and also taking a moment for everybody that came. This is actually a way that we kind of help work through loneliness, where it's talked about, it's validated, and we create a space for it. So thank you everybody for coming. So as I mentioned, I'm Emily. Nice to see all of you guys here today. My background is in counseling. I'm a licensed counselor professional, LCPC. I own a mental health practice in Orland Park. It's called Lotus Healing and Wellness Center. I primarily work with adults, but I also work with like middle school. So when they ask me to focus on adults, that's the majority of the population I work with, so I feel very comfortable talking about this. I'll first kind of switch gears. I'll first kind of talk about how I work with some of my clients with adults with loneliness, and then I'll kind of transition into kind of the outline today about loneliness and working among adults. So the population I work with is pretty vast, but I tend to work very well with clients that have gone through trauma and grief. So what I really notice how it's related to loneliness is a lot of my clients that are adults come in, and what they have that's very similar is earlier attachment wounds. So if we had a couple hours, I would get into what that really is, but I wouldn't want you guys to fall asleep. So basically, an attachment wound can be, a relationship that you maybe didn't develop when you were younger. Like a quick example might be, maybe you grew up in a home where your parents were divorced, and maybe one of the parents was out of the picture, and then the other parent maybe had to work a lot, right? So again, sometimes needs are not met for the individual, even though the circumstances, the child was worthy of that. So what can again happen is some early attachment wounds. And this can kind of happen through circumstances. So what I work with on these adult clients is helping them work through feeling more emotionally supported, because again, some of these individuals might have felt emotionally unsupported, they might have been criticized, disconnected. And what that can look like is, you learn in your nervous system which relationships might not be safe or reliable. And so later in life, clients come to us and they kind of want to work on these issues. So what I work with on clients, some of these themes related to loneliness could be grief. Grief isn't just somebody physically passed away. It can be the loss that we didn't have. So the loss of a marriage or a loss of a friendship. And so a lot of these themes are very common with loneliness, whether it's grief, major transitions, and these patterns tend to resurface later in life. Because often loneliness can feel very overwhelming. One of the techniques I work really well with clients on is called EMDR, and it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. That basically is helpful for a lot of clients that feel very stuck. Basically, therapy is helpful to talk about, but some clients that maybe have gone through a lot of trauma or deep-rooted issues, EMDR can be very helpful. And again, I'm just kind of sharing that because there's different types of therapy, just like Melissa talked about music therapy. So the goal that I work with clients that are going through these issues, we, for the first time, really process some of these memories and help them work through feeling stuck in isolation. And they're able to then experience, which is really beautiful, maybe even for the first time, closeness, trust, and connection. Okay? Again, I won't go into too much more on that, but I do think that all of us here have different experiences. And so again, that's kind of my niche, working with clients on trauma and grief. So that's kind of what I work directly related to some clients that come in for loneliness. It seems like we've kind of already defined what loneliness is, but I agree with how everybody described it. Again, it feels tricky because you're around a lot of people, but you don't feel seen or supported or sometimes disconnected. So unfortunately, when loneliness occurs for a really long time, that can really impact somebody's mood. It can change their thoughts, and most importantly, it can change how somebody sees themselves and others. And if you're wondering why that's so important and why loneliness feels so intense, something that we've learned in school, which I think is really important, and I remind every client that comes in, is we're actually wired for connection. It's in our genetics. And so when we are not connected to others, even, let's say, for example, I'm in this room and I don't maybe feel connected or seen. It's like I'm physically around people, but I don't feel that. And why that is it's in our genetics. And I'm sure a lot of you maybe experienced that during COVID. So again, I just think that's something really important to remind everybody, that this isn't a luxury. This is something we need for survival, just like water or food. So the topic that I have is an adulthood for loneliness. And I think why this area is so lonely for people is because what happens is this is actually a really busy time in our life, right? Again, for every human, it kind of varies. But for a lot of us, we are around coworkers, we're around family, and we're around responsibilities. And why do we feel lonely, right? Again, usually when you look at lifespan during adulthood, we typically are the busiest. We're very productive. And I think it often creeps up with us because what happens is during adulthood, that time of your life, you are so centered around being busy, caregiving, and survival. And then what happens is we don't get that need often to connect. So I think that's something really important to kind of highlight, is that again, even though this is a time in our life that we're thriving, we're very busy. So then we unfortunately sometimes become preoccupied to not connect with others. And so here's a few examples of how that comes up. Number one, for a lot of us, we might be focused on our career, and with that can come career burnout and stress. What it looks like is you're working long hours, there's a lot of pressure in your job, you might feel emotionally exhausted, and that can give little energy for friendships or meaningful connections. I know even as myself, I love working with clients. I own the practice too, so I'm constantly connecting with others. So I will acknowledge this is something I try to do better at, where I will try myself to be like, okay, Emily, even though you worked 20, 25 hours, you still need to connect on the weekends, even if it's like grabbing a coffee. Because again, even though a lot of our time is for others, for work, we again need that time to carve out to laugh and to play and to feel relaxed, to have a connection with people in our life that we find meaningful. Next, an area of life that deters us from connecting, to feel isolated, is for a lot of people that have families. Your time is then towards parenting and caregiving responsibilities. Meaning for a lot of adults, they're constantly giving to their children. They're constantly giving to their partners or parents or neighbors. And what happens is, for a lot of people, they're selfless, so they put everybody else first, and then therefore there's not a lot of time to really engage with other people. The other big area that comes up for loneliness, which happens to a lot of people, is just life circumstances and life transitions. Examples of that can be divorce, grief, move, a career change, children getting older, social circles shifting, and that can create distance. Again, what has happened is something happens in someone's life, a disruption occurs. I can attest, I went through a divorce, and you kind of get used to your life, and then all of a sudden this big change happens, and then you're really prioritizing with starting a new life over. So then again, it kind of prevents you from your normalcy of connections, because you're really focused on what that transition is. This is a really big one that often comes up in my relationships with the clients is surface level friendships. What this means is you might interact all day with people, but unfortunately, it's not maybe a space where it's really deep. And actually, that's something I actually love when I hear from my clients when they come in and they say, hey, Emily, I've really noticed, I'm grateful. I have friends, I have coworkers, but I'm not feeling connected. And what I do is kind of explore that. I'll kind of explore. And often what you'll hear is the clients will share, okay, well, my friend maybe wants to talk about the weather or something related to work, but they don't kind of go deeper. So again, what happens is you might be having a conversation every day with your coworker or a close friend, but you're maybe not having those intimate, vulnerable conversations. And so a lot of times what occurs is you don't feel like you're really being understood. You don't feel maybe it's safe or a vulnerable close. Again, that is because you're not maybe having those more enriched conversations. Which, sidebar, not everybody's capable of that. So kind of in life, then we kind of learned that you're going to have people in your life, probably like us therapists, that value that, right? We appreciate when someone really asks how we're doing and we can kind of go deep. But again, everyone's not always capable of that. So again, part of that can be kind of adjusting and understanding that not everyone has the capacity to do that. Next, after COVID, there was a lot of pandemic shifts, meaning a lot of times during that time era, people felt very isolated, and we all got kind of used to staying at home. You were less comfortable to initiate conversations. Some relationships didn't change, but a lot of socializing maybe felt a little different because, again, a lot of people were kind of being by themselves and being quiet. And for a lot of people, they're still kind of working through that. For certain people, they still kind of feel safe being at home because it feels safer. But again, that created a lot more loneliness because at that time we were really forced to stay in. So again, a lot of times it's kind of adjusting to come back out to reconnect. Next, emotional self-protection. This is really big. So for an individual that maybe was hurt in the past, whether it was rejection or trauma or disappointment, what occurs is vulnerability feels risky, even when someone wants it deeply. And again, this is something that I see probably every day in my practice with clients, is your brain is hardwired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So again, even though in times in our life we're going to be hurt, because that's what occurs, even if people don't mean to intentionally do that, often individuals in adulthood have gone through experiences, again, where it was maybe a betrayal or hurt. And what happens is your nervous system is like, I don't want that again. And so what happens is we kind of avoid. And even though that could feel safe in the moment, that prevents us from that deep connection. So again, part of the work we do with clients is having them process that, work through that, and then teaching them some resiliency skills. Again, we invalidate their emotions, but have them understand that not everybody's going to hurt you. What loneliness can feel like. And again, this is gonna look different for everybody, but these are just some symptoms that you might feel when you're lonely. You could feel disconnected when you're around others. You could believe that nobody really understands you. You might feel like you're pulling away from people, but when you want a connection. So it's kind of like this push-pull. You might feel awkward when you reach out to make plans. You might experience increased sadness, irritability, numbness, or hopefulness. Or you could feel like you're overworking, you're scrolling, or staying too busy to avoid the feeling. But again, those are just a few examples. It shows up different for everybody. Now, ways that in adulthood that we can start to reconnect, and I'm really big on this, just starting small. I think a lot of times when we're experiencing loneliness, we try to push past the threshold really quickly, and I kind of have an opposite perspective. I think change happens, and it doesn't have to happen fast. It could be small, gradual ways. So one way of doing that is if we're feeling lonely, we're not going to maybe force ourselves to just start talking to everybody. But what we can do is kind of start somewhere small. So examples of that could be a short text of somebody that you miss that you haven't seen in a while. I was actually just telling that to Alex the other day. We were supposed to do a coffee date and we had to reschedule. Literally something that I thought of today was like, I want to reach out to her and kind of, do coffee, right? So that's just a quick example we can do. It could also be a brief check-in. So let's say you are feeling really lonely and you're not ready to meet somebody, intimately. We can use the benefit of technology and maybe even just do a phone call. Next, we can start to be intentional. Meaning as adults, we often require planning. We try to wait till it feels right, but part of it is that's going to be harder. The longer you start to do something, the harder it can be. So again, when I mean be intentional, it's just kind of making sure that we're trying to make that more of a priority. The other big one, and I'm sure for a lot of us we do with our clients, is, and you guys can do this for yourself, is start to name the feeling. Right? Emotions are neither good or bad. In our field, I like to think of them as soft emotions or hard emotions, and that's the same for loneliness. Loneliness is actually not a bad thing. It's a normal emotion that we have, and so part of it can be even for your inner self to just say, I'm feeling lonely. Again, I know that can feel a little embarrassing or shameful, but what helps me through the emotions is just knowing as a normal human, we're gonna feel a normal range of all emotions, right? Just kind of like what Melissa was saying about Inside Out. I love that movie. It shows all the different emotions. And even in that main theme of the movie, it was trying to avoid like sadness, right? And it's like at the very end of Inside Out, I always love to show that to clients. Actually, once she experienced sadness of adjusting to moving, she felt better. Right? So it's kind of similar to feeling lonely, that once you start to allow yourself to feel that emotion, it gets easier. And saying something like, I've been feeling maybe disconnected lately, or I'm feeling not seeing somebody. Again, part of it is just step one, starting with you and just identifying it for yourself. And if that's not something you're comfortable with, that's what we're here for. We're here to teach you what the emotion is and to help you in a safe way process it. Another skill that can help with loneliness is not worrying about quality, but quantity. A technique that I always like to help with all my clients too is asking them who their support system is. We don't need 10 people in our support system, even if it's 2 or 3. So even if you're able to find 1 or 2 people that you genuinely connect with, that is actually better than being surrounded in a room of 50 people. And again, if you don't have anyone in your life, it can be even starting with a therapist. One of the biggest privileges I have is clients that still want to see me every week, even if they're feeling better. They just like to be in a safe environment to socialize. Another technique that can help you is to reconnect in shared spaces. So what that means is looking in the life you have already. So for example, if you're in a book club or you go to a specific gym, or maybe there's a local restaurant you want to go to, it can be about, rebuilding your support system in places that you're already established with in your community. Other examples could be college community, a faith community, volunteering, hobbies. Again, there are people out there that do want to connect. They might be a little harder to find, but I think the more that you initiate and you put yourself out there, that you'd be surprised. The next one could be slowly starting to be more vulnerable gradually. What allows healthy connection and the antidote of working through loneliness is starting to slowly come out of your shell. And how we do this is start to let people know how we feel in a small way. Next, we can start to reduce socializing habits. I think a good one that Melissa mentioned was social media, right? So part of this too is when we're looking at loneliness is to also evaluate how we live in our lifestyle. And so it can be kind of looking at what are my habits, right? If I'm really trying to not feel isolated and connect with others, I can also start to hold myself accountable and asking myself, am I doing everything I can to work through the loneliness or connect with others? You can kind of look at your micro habits and kind of evaluate if there's things that you're doing that are avoiding these connections. So again, we can do that by trying to isolate habits that are helpful for us. Examples could be, are you constantly canceling plans? I'm sure we all have friends like that, you know? Are we overworking too much? Are we excessively on our screen time? Again, these are habits that are not going to allow us to disconnect. One of the best things to do to work through loneliness, and if we want connection, is to live that alignment, meaning are we actually doing things that are going to allow us to have connection? And again, for some of us, we are avoiding. So part of the work is we have to do that ourselves. We have to make sure that we're following through with trying to decrease these isolation habits. And then also not being afraid to get support when needed. That's why I'm so glad all of you guys are here today, is really just not being afraid to, if this is an area that we struggle with, and by the way, it's extremely common, so you don't have to do it by yourself. You know, there are people like ourselves that are here that are, it's such a privilege to hold a space and to help somebody work on these areas in their life that you don't have to do it by yourself. Something I think of, at least for the mental health, is, you know, we don't do that in other areas of life, right? Like, for example, if like my tooth hurts, I don't mind going to the dentist, right? I'm aware that that dentist is gonna help me. Same thing with my car. I don't know anything about cars. If something happened to my car, I would be no problem going to the mechanic. And so I think why I wanted to come today, or why I love to come to these events, is to really normalize mental health. That all of us went to school, this is what we specialize in. And so if we are going through something that we can't work through with ourselves, it shouldn't be different, similar to the dentist or the car mechanic, that we should feel a little bit more comfortable to come to somebody like us, counselors, or in the mental health field, that we can kind of help you if there's things going on in your mind, or goals that you want to achieve that you can't do by yourself. And then the last point is, loneliness by no means is ever a failure. I hope if it's one takeaway that I can share with all of you that's really important, is that loneliness is not a bad thing. As I mentioned, no emotion is either good or bad, they're neutral. It's actually it's a signal for us. So when you feel lonely, it's really just a signal that you need more meaningful connections. You might need a more supportive environment, and you need a place where you can be yourself. So again, if that's one takeaway you can get from what I shared with you today, just kind of know, leaving today, loneliness is not a bad thing. It's just a light going off and a signal to you of something that you are actually trying to reconnect to, which again is a really good thing. So thank you guys so much for listening to me. And yeah, again, I appreciate seeing all of you guys today.
Thank you so much to Emily for her wealth of knowledge and also bringing in her clinical expertise. Now, if I can give it away to Dr. Raquel Novak, she will be discussing the senior and aging population.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Raquel Novak. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a private practice over in Orland Park. I work with primarily adolescents, adults, and older adults. And I typically work from a cognitive behavioral approach. I use a lot of mindfulness techniques in my therapy. And loneliness does come up quite often with clients. And it's something everyone, I think, experiences at some point in their life. So I want you to kind of think, have you ever gone an entire day without a meaningful conversation? Now, I want you to imagine that turning into weeks. How would that look? What would that feel like? And as mentioned today, loneliness isn't just about being alone. Because let's be honest, sometimes there are moments when being alone is actually pretty great. It's quiet, no one's asking you for things, you know, you get to sit as long as you want without being bothered. Loneliness is different. It's a feeling of being disconnected or unseen, as a lot of the speakers here were talking about. Feeling like no one really hears you or sees you or knows how your day was. And for many older adults, this becomes a quiet, growing reality. So again, loneliness, it's not being alone, it's the gap between the connections we have and the connections we need. Someone can live alone and feel completely content. And then someone else can be surrounded by so many people and yet still feel deeply lonely. Loneliness is subjective. It's about connection, not just company. So why does this happen? As we age, we experience loss. We lose spouses, siblings, close friends, the people who knew our history, our routines, and our social circle just naturally starts to shrink. It's about losing those people who really knew you as a person in your life. And that's one of the hardest things about it. There's also changes in mobility and access. When you're younger, socializing is easier. You kind of just get up and go. When you're older, it becomes this whole decision-making process. Do I want to go out? Do I want to stay home? What's the weather like? Because if the weather's bad, some people have a fall risk, and that may prevent them from leaving their home that day. How will I get there? There are some people that maybe can't drive and have to depend on someone to take them somewhere, to the grocery store, to the doctor. All of these things add up. It makes even simple socializing that much harder. Then there's technology. We often say, well, just use technology to stay connected. And it's a great idea in theory, but if you've ever tried to join a video call and somehow accidentally turned on your flashlight, we know it's not always that simple. So then there's also retirement. With retirement also comes this loss of daily structure. So when you go to work, you see people, and you interact with them whether you want to or not. They're there. Then retirement comes, and people say, congratulations, yay, you're free. And you are, but you also just lost one of your main sources of human interaction. Even that coworker who maybe kind of annoyed you a little bit, they still counted. Retirement can free up your time, but it can also quietly remove that daily connection. Then there's also family shifts that occur. So as you have children and they grow up, they may leave the state. They may move across the country. They may even move out of the country. There's also less intergenerational living. So back in the day, I know for my parents, a lot of people lived in a building where, my parents lived with, their siblings and their parents, and then maybe grandma and grandpa lived in the same building on another floor, and then maybe aunts, uncles, cousins, maybe they all lived in the household as well. That's just not happening as much anymore. So now here's why this matters. Loneliness doesn't just affect how we feel, it affects how we function. And as mentioned earlier, there is an increased risk of depression, anxiety, cognitive decline like memory problems. There's also physical health effects as well. It has an impact on our heart health, sleep problems, a weakened immune system. Some researchers say chronic loneliness can impact health just as much as smoking or obesity, and I believe somebody did mention that earlier as well. So this isn't just about emotions, it's about our overall well-being. But here's the good news. Loneliness is not inevitable. Connection is something we can build and rebuild at any age. It doesn't have to be big or complicated. Sometimes it starts with small things. It can be chatting with a neighbor, a regular phone call with somebody, seeing a familiar face once a week. Even those brief interactions matter because, again, we as humans are wired for connection. So what actually helps? Well, relationships need maintenance, regular phone calls, regular meetups, going out for coffee, taking a walk together, maybe going out for a walk with your neighbor. And friendships don't just happen automatically anymore. Now they look a little bit more like, I'll see you in 3 weeks at 2, unless one of us is too tired and cancels that day. And sometimes we cancel because we are tired. But connection takes a little effort and it's worth it. Community is also very important. Joining senior centers, faith communities, volunteer opportunities, maybe taking a class. It could be an art class, a fitness class, learning something new. Connection and purpose often go hand in hand. And intergenerational connections are important as well. Spending time with grandchildren, maybe a mentorship, community programs pairing youth and seniors together. Spending time with younger people can bring energy, perspective, and meaning. And, don't get me wrong about technology. It can be a great tool for video calls and messaging, but it is not a replacement for human connection. Small daily interactions matter. Sometimes the most meaningful moment in someone's day is when you ask, "How are you?" And you'll actually listen to their answer. Small connections add up more than we think. Talking to a cashier, greeting your neighbors, attending regular activities. Connection doesn't have to be deep to be meaningful, it just has to be human. So loneliness and aging, it's not just an individual issue, it's a community issue. Something we all play a role in. If you're thinking today, I should really check in on someone. Maybe it's a neighbor, a friend, a family member you haven't maybe heard from in a while or talked to in a while. This is your sign. Not next week, not when things slow down, because let's be honest, things don't really ever slow down. It could be a quick phone call, a visit, an invitation. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to happen. A 5-minute conversation can make a bigger difference than we realize. So you see, we don't need hundreds of connections with people. We just need a few people who know us, who notice us, and who would also notice if we were gone. And the good news is we can be that person for someone else too. Because at the end of the day, aging is inevitable, but loneliness doesn't have to be. That's something we can all work on together. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Dr. Novak for bringing in all these important concepts like intergenerational living and connection, which I'm sure we will get questions on later on down the line. So I had scheduled about 5 minutes for stretching, bathroom breaks. We have some marketing materials, t-shirts, things on those tables. This is also the time for us to reshuffle some notes and things like that. So let's take 5 minutes and then we'll reconnect with Erin. All right, everyone. So as we get settled back, I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Erin. She'll be going over the LGBTQ and the neurodivergent communities, as well as how loneliness really folds into both of those communities. So I'd love to hear you take it away. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Erin. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I work with quite a lot of queer adolescents and adults. So that will be my primary focus today, but I'll also touch upon neurodivergent communities, and there's a lot of crossover, so they go along together. When it comes to the LGBTQ community, they experience and report more loneliness than heterosexual adults and adolescents. So they do have increased rates of loneliness. And particularly within the trans community, those numbers are even higher. I have some clients that will come to me, and I'm the first person that they've ever told this to. And if you can imagine keeping a core part of your identity as a secret and hiding that from everyone important to you because you are afraid of how they will respond, that creates loneliness that is so profound, because even the people that you are closest to and who love you the most and who you love the most don't know this very key, important aspect of you. And that can create really deep loneliness. For other individuals, they may have told their family members and their peers. Coming out is never a one-time event. It's a constant. Trying to decide whether this person is safe enough to come out to. So there is a misunderstanding there sometimes of like, oh yeah, they came out, but they have to constantly decide whether to come out to people or not. And if they're coming out to peers and their friends, their family members, and they're not hiding this part of themselves anymore, there can also be quite a lot of loneliness because there's a lot of social rejection that can happen. And although now, in our present day, I like to think that we're much, much more accepting of people, there is still a tremendous amount of discrimination and hate towards the queer community. And so I do work a lot with clients who report having very, very little social connection because they are being isolated, they're being rejected. There's often a lot of bullying in the schools, bullying online. There's experiences clients come to me with of, discrimination in the workplace. And so there's this constant navigation of how can I show up in the world? Am I allowed to be myself? Or do I need to hide part of myself? And that creates this barrier to connection where even if a queer individual is trying to reach out, trying to socially engage, there can be a boundary up when it comes to being vulnerable. And this is something that I've seen in some of my clients, particularly clients that are in like their midlife to later years, that grew up in a time where there was less acceptance, and these individuals had to be very hypervigilant about everything they did because they needed to hide who they were from everybody. And that hypervigilance creates so much social anxiety because They're questioning, as a kid in school, how I'm sitting, how I am standing, the things I say I'm interested in, because what if somebody perceives that I'm gay? And that creates such a barrier to social connection, a profound barrier. And so in these clients, even 30, 40 years later, when our world has changed a lot, there's still discrimination, but it's better than it was. There is still this wounded child inside, and a wounded nervous system that has very good reason to want to protect the individual from vulnerability and connection, because that was not safe. And it still feels unsafe in the nervous system. So some of these clients, even though they're now out to family, maybe they've had romantic partners, there is still a barrier to emotional vulnerability with even their romantic partners. And that often relates back to childhood and this constant need to be hypervigilant about their behavior, and all of these experiences of rejection. And so with those clients, I tend to work a lot with doing like inner child healing. I work from a psychodynamic lens, which tracks how childhood experiences are relating to present experiences and relationships, and tracking that and helping the client understand where some of this is coming from and learn new ways to engage with others and provide some experiences for nervous system safety. And so that happens in the office with me, where whether it's a client that is an older adult who experienced so much negativity based on their identity as a child, or maybe this is an adolescent that I'm seeing who has never been able to tell anyone that they're gay or that they're trans, I create safety in that moment for them to experience something positive while explaining to me their identity and providing an experience for their nervous system specifically to feel calm. So that experience then, as we repeat that over and over in our sessions, that starts to rewrite some of that nervous system activation that prevents people from connecting with others, which contributes to that feeling of loneliness. The other major thing that I wanted to bring up was environment. So creating supportive, accepting, inclusive environments is one of the best things that we can do to fight against loneliness in the queer community. So that might look like having a pride flag up, or having some rainbow decorations, little signs that show, okay, this is a safe, accepting space. And whether that person ever mentions that they are queer or not, the more they see spaces that are accepting by those visual cues, the safer they're going to feel in themselves, which then helps them feel safer with others. Now, the feeling of needing to hide one's identity also is linked to a feeling of being like the only one. So if we are all hiding who we are, if we're all hiding parts of our identity, it can be really difficult to know who else shares that identity. And thankfully, this is less of a problem now than it was 50 years ago when, each gay boy was convinced he was the only one in the school, in the town, in the state that existed. That's less of a problem now, but it still can feel very isolating and like you're the only one. So community is something that I talk quite a lot about, and I try to help connect clients to communities that they will be able to find others who share their identity. So in the suburbs, we have Youth Outlook. They have multiple locations throughout the suburbs, and then an online group where I like to direct my trans youth to specifically, because those are the clients I see that feel the most loneliness and feel extremely isolated and have no one else who is going through the same experience as them, whether that be like in their school or in their neighborhood. They don't have anyone else who's going through that. So being able to connect them to some of those community groups helps to fight that loneliness, because they're able to connect with other youth that have that same identity, who are going through the same struggles. They realize they're not alone and are able to talk to others and see that they're having the same like tiny experiences, right? It's often the little things that we connect the most on. And so that's something that's really, really supportive. And loneliness, I believe it's been mentioned a couple times, it's linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety. So being able to work with clients as well on coping skills for depression, using behavioral activation. So that's a tool of using little steps to get the ball rolling. And what that might look like in a session is I am recommending a client attend this community event, and I know that there's this low likelihood they're going to follow through with it because of anxiety, because of low motivation. And so we'll talk about it and we'll sign up together in that session, right? Or I'll send it to their parent if that's what they want, for us to address it right then and there, so that they can get connected and that it's not left on them and they have that support while they do it. And that tends to yield higher results of success, I've found, is doing that together with them during session. The other thing that is really awesome is schools now have the GSA Club, the Gay Straight Alliance, and that's something that I always encourage clients to get involved with, and research has shown that being involved in clubs like GSA or having a school environment that is accepting and supportive and provides like social emotional education also around queerness and bullying, that the rates of loneliness are lower. So that's another beautiful resource for our LGBTQ community. There are others like EQ Downers Grove is a really wonderful community where people, all ages, lots of different identities, go out and have like community outings every couple of weeks, like going to the Arboretum or doing a trivia night somewhere. And that's a great way to build community and decrease these feelings of isolation and loneliness within the queer community. I also wanted to bring up the education that I do with parents. So a lot of my kids that are queer come to me and parents don't understand or have negative reactions. And so I do work with parents about that. Like I work with the parents separately from their kids so that we can talk through their beliefs and their difficulty with this and help to support them and provide education so that they can better support their kids, because having just like one adult that is accepting and supporting decreases the risk of suicide in queer youth by about 50%. So yes, that can be me, but having it be a parent is even better, because that parent is in the household, and I like to start spreading that throughout their whole support system and working with their support system so that they don't feel lonely when they're surrounded by their loved ones, which is unfortunately common. And along those lines, having just one person who uses the right pronouns and the right name reduces suicide attempts in trans youth by half, and that's remarkable. So having such success with that it's incredible. Like, that 50% marker is not something we normally see with interventions. Like, that's a really, really remarkable decrease. So these are simple things that make such a big difference in helping the LGBTQ community feel less alone and less isolated and more supported. As far as the neurodivergent communities, I am not necessarily an expert on that. I have done quite a lot of work with children with autism. I spent a couple of years doing at-home behavior therapy with children with autism before I became a counselor. So I've done a lot of social training with kids who are on the spectrum, and that's one way that we can help to decrease the loneliness there, because kiddos with autism often have difficulty socializing with their peers, and part of it is not understanding some of the social cues and social norms that might be more easily understood by someone who's neurotypical. And so doing some of that social education and social training can really help kids to develop social connections and make them feel less alone and less different, as well as getting community involvement again. So whether that looks like being engaged in some groups for children with autism where they get together and play, or perhaps a kid has a special interest. Maybe their special interest is bowling, getting them in a bowling league, things like that that will support what they are interested in and bring them around other people that are interested in the same thing, because that gives them something to connect over and can decrease those feelings of loneliness. I think that's what I've got for you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I heard a lot of great suggestions about support groups, and specifically naming some support groups in our area, so I'm sure we'll cover a little bit of that in our Q&A. And last but not least, we have the loneliness and addiction subcategory. I'd like to introduce Delia and Lee to discuss how loneliness fits into this category, because this is something very important to our committee, and I'd love to hear their expertise here.
Hello, my name is Delia, and I am a licensed professional counselor, and today I'm going to be speaking with Lee as well, and we're going to talk about addiction and loneliness. So one of the bravest things that a person can do is let someone else know that they are not okay. And that takes courage, real courage, the kind that does not look like courage from the outside. It just looks like a phone call or a knock on the door or meeting a friend for coffee and having a quiet admission over that coffee. But it is brave, and it matters more than most people will ever tell you. Today we're again talking about something that is hard to talk about: addiction and loneliness. And those two things find each other. In my work as a therapist, the most consistent thing I see is this: addiction does not start in a vacuum. It starts in pain. And from so many of the other speakers here today, we've seen countless examples of pain across the lifespan. Whether that's trauma or even very young age, feeling this pressure to perform, evaluation by peers or social comparisons, or rejection in our bids for connection, or these bids for connection feeling superficial, feeling like we don't belong because of our identities, some of those early attachment wounds, whether that's from divorce, maybe even adoption or abuse, as we're aging and feeling more physical pain that feels like it's hard to escape, or feeling that this physical pain is bringing us a loss of autonomy and independence, seeing as we're older as well, feeling like we're not needed anymore, that our kids don't need us anymore, or feeling like we need an invitation to see our grandchildren, as was discussed before. Here is something that might surprise you, and now by this point, you've heard a lot in this presentation here. Loneliness is not just an emotion. It exists in our nervous system. It is a biological state. When we are chronically disconnected, our stress hormones rise, our emotional dysregulation suffers, and our brain starts searching for some form of relief. Substances offer a fast answer to a very deep question. Your brain in isolation itself is not weak. It is doing exactly what it is designed to do, to seek comfort. The problem is what it finds. And once addiction takes hold, it creates the very thing that fed it. It damages relationships. It generates shame. It makes people pull away from the people who could actually help them. The loneliness deepens, and so does the urge to use. It is a cycle, and it is brutal. In Will County alone, 72 people died from a drug-related cause in 2025. They range in age from 14 to 74. Because this is not a young person's problem, and it is not an old person's problem. It is a human problem. Nearly half of those deaths, 31 of them, involve fentanyl or heroin, and many of those involved an addictive substance called xylazine, sometimes called tranq, that makes an overdose nearly impossible to reverse, even with Narcan. The drug landscape has changed, and it is more dangerous than most people realize. The data also skews heavily male. That is not a coincidence. Men are socialized from a very early age to manage alone, to push through, and to not need help. And when the pain gets loud enough, they are less likely to reach out and more likely to reach for something else. That is what makes the act of courage I mentioned so important and so hard. At least one of those 72 people died right here in Homer Glen. Behind every one of those numbers is a family, a neighborhood, a community that lost someone. Here in Homer Glen, we are not immune to that. No community is. And here is the specific challenge a community like ours faces. We do not always look like we are struggling here. Good schools, safe streets, full calendars. There's a lot of pride in Homer Glen, as there should be. But that same pride can make it very hard to reach out. When everyone around you seems to be managing just fine, admitting that someone you love or that you yourself is not okay can feel, emphasis on feel, like a failure. It is not. It is one of the most human things that there is. And I want to leave you with something. You know, I think sometimes we have forgotten in our busy world with full schedules and screens in our hands that the most important thing we can offer another person is not advice, it is not solutions, it is our very presence. The simple, powerful act of saying, I see you, you are not alone, and you matter to me. Not because of what you have accomplished, not because of how you appear, just because you are here, just because you are you. That is enough to change someone's life. It really is, and research confirms this. People who feel supported, as we've said before, even by one person alone, are more likely to enter treatment, more likely to stay in treatment, and more likely to recover. Not because someone had the perfect thing to say, but because somebody stayed. And this neighborhood, your neighborhood, is full of people who are capable of exactly that. So now I will hand it over to Lee, and you will now hear about the signs to watch for, the tools that help, and the support right here in our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Delia. My name is Lee Powers. I am a clinical intern at Lotus Healing and Wellness with Emily, set to graduate in May from Governor's State, hopefully getting my license in May as well. I'll be talking about, as she mentioned, kind of how addiction can increase loneliness, signs to watch for, common coping skills that have great benefits. When we talk about addiction, we often focus on the substance itself, but many people are also struggling with something quieter underneath it, which is loneliness. It's more, as we mentioned a few times, but it's good to hear it more than once as well. It's more than being alone. It's about that feeling of disconnection, and that can come before addiction, during addiction, after addiction. For many people, substances can temporarily numb that emotional pain, as Julia mentioned. They may reduce stress for that short period of time, quiet difficult thoughts, create that feeling of escape. But over time, substance use often creates even more distance from others. That is why loneliness matters in recovery. Healing is not only about stopping substance use, but also rebuilding that connection. So now, how addiction can increase isolation. As addiction grows, many people will begin pulling away from others. They might hide what they're going through, avoid conversations, feel shame about needing help, stop attending support groups, and believe that they have to handle everything alone. And as Delia mentioned as well, that cycle might start to come forward. Loneliness can create emotional pain. Substances might numb it temporarily, but then the shame and isolation grow stronger. In recovery, these feelings can become even more noticeable because emotions are no longer numbed. They're really starting all to surface now. That does not necessarily mean that recovery is failing. It just often means that support is needed. Some signs to watch for. Loneliness and addiction can affect people of any age as well. Like she mentioned, it spans across every age. Some common signs might include withdrawing from family or friends, low motivation, mood changes or more irritability, emotional numbness, avoiding support systems, increased cravings, negative self-talk, and seeming fine when they're clearly struggling. Sometimes loneliness can also look like boredom, restlessness, or emotional distance instead of sadness. And what reaching out can look like. Many people want to help, but they might worry they're saying the wrong thing or it feels awkward. It does not need to be perfect. And back to kind of what Emily mentioned earlier, simple ways are a good place to start. You might even say, you haven't seemed like yourself lately. I care about you. Like Delia mentioned too, I see you. You don't have to do this alone. Can I help you take the next step? It might feel awkward, and that's normal. Asking for help often feels awkward too, but it is still very important. And some coping skills that can help reduce that isolation, just texting one trusted person, going for a walk instead of isolating, attending one meeting even if motivation is low, sit in a low-pressure public space. That reminds me, I recently spoke with a client of mine how sometimes just being in a public space, whether it's your school library or the local library, a local coffee shop, having that presence but not the pressure can really kind of help you feel a little bit more seen. Also saying out loud what you're feeling or journaling what you're feeling, asking someone to stay with you during a difficult moment. Sometimes healing starts with those very small steps. And now talking about why support groups matter. Support groups help because they reduce loneliness, remind people they're not the only ones struggling. They provide that connection, also accountability, encouragement, and a shared understanding. Also commenting about like client support systems. That's something I really like to kind of pinpoint early on, like what are your support systems outside of the session? It's great to have the therapist, the counselor, to have that connection and that safe space to share, the non-judgmental space, but also what outside of this space can help you have that connection as well. And some local groups that I found serve in Mokina. The Fellowship Center offers AA, Al-Anon, CODA meetings. It's one of the closest regular recovery meetings near Homer Glen. The Fellowship Club of Will County in Crest Hill offers ongoing recovery meetings and peer support. Al-Anon meetings are available near Homer Glen for family members affected by loved ones' addictions. Also in Lamont, Mokina, Orland Park. Behavioral Health and Addiction Recovery Committee, Homer Glen's local committee focused on mental health awareness, addiction education, stigma reduction, and community resources. Meetings are open to the public. And additional support treatment can come from Family First Intervention in Mokina, providing addiction support and intervention services. And now moving towards opioids as well, we just wanted to touch on opioid addiction serves special attention because many overdoses happen when someone is alone. A person might already feel disconnected, they might use alone, have no one nearby if that happens, and that's one reason why loneliness becomes such an important topic in recovery. And just touching on as well, I know Delia mentioned Narcan. This is just kind of a brief summary, but in Illinois, Narcan can be obtained at most pharmacies without an individual prescription under the statewide standing order. Narcan is not meant for anyone, not just someone actively using. Many people carry it simply to be prepared, but what to do? Call 911. You might give the Narcan, stay with the person, and trainings are also offered locally as well. And just a random fact as well, Narcan usually lasts about 3 years, but even expired Narcan should still be used in an overdose emergency if nothing else is available. And just to kind of close out, recovery is not only about removing substances, it's also about helping people feel less alone. Support does not always begin in crisis. Sometimes healing begins when someone notices, asks, and stays. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Delia and Lee. And thank you to everyone who has participated today. I know that you guys are a wealth of knowledge, and I would love to open up the floor now to any of our audience members to ask any questions. Questions can be directed at individuals or to the whole group. I realize this is a very sensitive topic, hence why we did such a heavy presentation on loneliness, because it's not something that we immediately think of as being a problem. If no one feels like they would want to talk, that is okay too. I have about 21 anonymous questions that were submitted that we can go through. But I would love to open it up to anyone who feels compelled to ask any questions. There are certain church, like faith-based communities that will take a roster of maybe the older adults that are part of their fellowship, and they do try to make it a point to reach out to these folks. I know my church does something similar, so I'm wondering if this Friendship Calls is maybe something more broader that wasn't related to a faith-based community, but because you bring up this question, and I'm sure we're all curious to see if we can find something about it, we'll do some research, and then my promise to you is the next time our committee meets, we can see what we can present in terms of information, if we can track this down, or something similar. Thank you. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I have a scenario where I have a cousin that I call every day, and she's a widower. Recently, she doesn't want to come to family functions. I mean, birthday parties, communions, graduations. And the reason she says is because she doesn't have the money to buy a present. And she's Lithuanian, so a little big, strong. And she said, I was brought up that way. If you don't have a present, you can't go. So what would you advise her to make things better?
So I married into a very Polish family where gift giving, is very important. And I would say, I would suggest if she can't afford a material gift, maybe cook something delicious, maybe a family recipe, maybe something that, oh, do you remember grandma's so-and-so? Or, somebody in the family always has that one secret recipe that everybody just goes crazy over. So something maybe that she can offer, it doesn't have to be monetary per se, but thinking into what she still can do or still can offer from her. And I think that would be just as wonderful.
I have something too to add on. One, and depending on like how close you are, I think we often forget too, like we are the gift, So again, I'm not sure if like she's open to that suggestion too, but maybe even reminding her of her worth and that like her going is amazing. And if she still finds that she needs the gift, maybe it could be connecting with other family members and maybe seeing if other people have finances where maybe being able to support her if that makes her feel good to kind of bring a gift. So I don't know if those suggestions could be helpful.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult, and I call her every day, just like I thought that was great about making connections, but she even lied to me about Thanksgiving. She said, we invited her, and my kids all tell her, you don't have to bring a gift, we just want your presents, and so forth, but I don't know, she's stuck, and I'm stuck too, and I feel though she's almost like a sister to me, and I keep telling her, you're missing out on a lot of things. We have a birthday party today, and she doesn't want to go because, once again, I feel funny about it. So we're just stuck. So I'm trying to reason with her and so forth, but like you said, it is a nationality type thing, and our cultures that we have in various ways we grew up. This was it. But thank you for your talks. I thought it was great too. Everybody was great, and I appreciate you guys being here. I'm on the committee with Alexandra, so this was wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to share as well, maybe like a handwritten letter or some sort of just sharing her wisdom might be a gift, if that would be of considerable value for her, like just advice and like a nice handwritten card.
Good try.
Can I add one thing? I'm sorry. Also, I think just validating that and letting her know she's heard, seen, and I hear you that it feels uncomfortable to come with, and I'm going to respect that. Let me know if I can support you in any way or help you feel comfortable to join in. We would love to have you. Just validating that experience for her, that I hear you and I see you and I understand, can decrease that loneliness. Even if it's not socially joining in, she's heard and seen and understood.
Absolutely.
You tried it. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to pose to our panel? No. All right, well, if anyone changes their minds, I'll be here watching for hands. I do have a couple important questions now that the panel has kind of presented their wisdom. A lot of what came through anonymously was related to loneliness across the populations. Meaning that there is definitely overlap between when loneliness presents and how we can target it at every specific lifespan stage. So I posed to the group, where do you see the biggest overlap in terms of like loneliness per population, and how do you feel like things might be slipping through the cracks? So my interpretation of this is, as maybe we age from adolescence to adulthood or adulthood to older adulthood, are there areas where we could do better because some individuals are maybe falling through cracks or moving from different systems that are not being as supportive as they could through transitions?
I'd say a big one that I see is younger demographics with trauma, with like parents having trauma. And then what occurs is in the home environmental, those parents don't want to engage, meaning they maybe don't encourage the children to go out to outings or kind of teach the children how important that is. And not that they don't mean to do that, but because they have their own unhealed trauma. This is really, it's like a huge theme I see, not just even in like demographics, but just I think in generational trauma. So I think one suggestion could be, and I know it's hard in schools, but even like therapists really being mindful as they're working with students. Again, a lot of like counselors or social workers have so many students, so I know it is hard for them to like meet with students, but I think one big one could be like preventative care, of really understanding how important it is for connection. And so for those possible social workers or therapists that maybe don't have all that time to see the students, really referring out to therapists like us, because again, I have even a bunch of 20-year-olds, maybe at least 5 on my caseload, and they have kind of a resentment towards parents in a sense of like, my parents don't go anywhere. They didn't teach us to go anywhere. And so a lot of my adults now are for the first time venturing out, and there's again a lot of like resentment or bitterness. So work I do with my clients is trying to have them understand that it wasn't intentional, not invalidating them, but really seeing the disconnect with their parents having so much trauma that they were fearful of going out and navigating the world. So that would be, I think, one big suggestion of knowing we all just, yeah, kind of encouraging those therapists or the in-house for school for clients to get support outside of school.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other either specific anecdotal evidence or suggestions, such as the gap between like school and being outside of school, or other systems maybe between work and retirement where they're seeing some gaps in terms of us providing support?
Well, I'll share, like, what came to mind when you asked that is how, as you're like a middle-aged adult or an older adult, it might be widely considered that, you know, you kind of have your life down, like you know what's going on, you're wise, but a lot of times that's, I feel like when you could feel most isolated, because your friends, your family, they all have their own lives, they all have their own families now. Like someone mentioned earlier, it's hard to connect, like April 21st at 2 p.m., I'll see you then. Like even myself, I'm booking out into April now too myself, but I feel like it's important to have those community groups in that aspect too, like the book club, or kind of finding those community aspects, even when you're like an older middle-aged adult, kind of just recognizing and validating that you don't have those connections that are fulfilling for you.
Thank you. Now, in the respect of time, and I realize we've been here for 2 hours, I'm not going to go through every single question we have, but there is a particularly strong question that I feel like is a good way for us to wrap up and almost summarize some of the key takeaways and resources. if any of you feel compelled, in one sentence, what is the most important takeaway that you want our audience to have and to leave with about loneliness?
I would say one of the most important takeaways that I would want you all to leave with is to take the stigma and the shame out of addiction use, because that is what continues the loneliness cycle. So be there, be present, and let them know that you see them as an individual, not just a person that uses.
Anyone else?
I would say regarding loneliness, just know, like I said, everyone experiences it at some point in time in their life. It can happen at any age across the lifespan. But more so importantly is, you know, like I said, we can build and rebuild those connections at any point in time. So just know that, you know, if there is someone that you haven't checked in on in a very long time, you know, today's the day to do it.
And I would say that the significance of it only taking one person, one quality connection to make someone realize that they're not alone and let them feel like they're not alone is so important, that it doesn't take, you know, a whole group. Just one person can make a really big difference.
I'd say too, it's like all of our responsibility. You know, I think that's a big one that, you know, obviously us as therapists, we can do the work, but I think just recognizing we all have ebb and flows, meaning like there might be times we're more present and in a good space to connect, but then there might be times where we're not in that space. So I think, again, just making sure that we know this is a group effort. If you see someone like sad or disconnected or somebody not involved, kind of like what you suggested with your family member, you're noticing her not being present. I think just knowing that we can't do it alone, to just all actively try to help in this situation. Because again, you don't know in a time in your life when you might appreciate someone doing that for you.
Kind of relating to that last question, and a final thing, is something that is lacking in research in adolescence and loneliness right now is the voices of the adolescents, because loneliness is subjective. It's really important to believe and trust that what you are hearing and getting from your child is the truth. And so kind of, I think the most important thing, because it is subjective, again, just going back to the most important thing is that I hear you, I see you, I trust you, I understand you, I delight in you, even when you are in a dysregulated state, even when you are struggling, I care about you and I hear you. I work with young children and parents. Dr. Brenna Hicks talks about the be with attitudes, simply just learning to be with your child. I hear you, I see you, I understand you, I am with you. That is the most important thing to decrease loneliness. And so that's what
I'm going to share as well that help is available. I feel like that's a good takeaway, whether it's reconnecting with a friend, reconnecting with yourself, finding a therapist that's good for you, and if finances kind of get in the way, there's free local community groups as well, and just knowing that help is available, and those groups, those friends, those family can kind of help you navigate from there, and just taking those small steps.
My favorite saying when I call somebody that I haven't talked to is, "Are you alive yet?" So I says, "Way to go." But this is a time where we have the media and so much going on. I think communication is important, and parents have to be involved, and they have to be a cheerleader as well as the coach. And just complimenting him, says, even though he didn't make the baseball team, and say, the effort was there. You tried the best you can. Let's go explore other areas. And that right there keeps the family unit going and prevents some of the things that we talked about with loneliness and frustration, and that leads to things. But I appreciate all you guys here once again and enjoyed what you had to say, and there's more to come in our future, right? Just keep at it and keep trying. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the audience members and for our participants. We have had a wealth of knowledge, a almost overload of information to share, but there's no such thing as too much information, especially when it comes to a topic like loneliness. It can be so easily overlooked. It's not necessarily something that we immediately think of as an epidemic or something that the U.S. Surgeon General would raise a flag for. So thank you to everyone. We will have a video available with this entire discussion on our website at some point in time when it is done being edited. So I know if we talked a lot and if we brought up a lot of things, you guys will be able to revisit that. We do have our behavioral committee's website attached to the Village of Homer Glen website, where there are so many resources for folks to access. All it takes is a couple clicks to have some information about what are some free, low-cost resources, support groups, community initiatives, Will County initiatives. So take a look at that if you would like some more information. But besides that, thank you, everyone.